Thanks, Jeff. You might hand those out. They're probably not enough for everybody, but it's mainly aimed at beginners. How many people here have been turning less than, say, 2 or 3 years? We've got a few. The principles that I want to talk about, you know, are good reminders for people that have been turning for a while. It's good to have these clear in your mind when you perhaps using a different tool or you're doing a different type of turning. The main reason that I wanted to do this demo, I did this down in Bunbury, so some of you may have seen it before. I'll try and do things a little bit differently today. It's easier with a smaller room to interact a little bit more. So if you've got questions or something you don't understand or I mess something up, let me know and we'll get on with it. But what I found in Mandurah is that we're having quite a few beginners show up and they're using these sort of things, carbide tipped tools, which basically are just scrapers. So we find that people are being sold these and being told these are the easier way to do things, and that's not necessarily the case. When you're turning a bowl, for instance, you can get into a lot of trouble using these type of tools, and we've seen it down in Mandurah, and I wanted to sort of try and clarify to people where these tools are good and where they're not so good. So what we find typically with the carbides is that they're sharpened on each face so that you can just turn it and have a fresh sharpened edge. And the problem that causes is that as well as cutting on the front edge of the carbide cutter, you can also cut on the side edge, and that's where the trouble sometimes comes in. So let's talk a little bit about the basic rules of turning, things that we all should know.
Excuse me.
Yep.
The tools you just mentioned, I've been sold one.
Yep.
The beast I've got's actually got a round carbide.
Okay, so yes, so let me show you a couple.
Sorry, Steve, somebody's
Someone's broken in. Some of these I can pass around if people haven't seen them before, but I'm sure you've all seen them. The typical set consists of a square, a round, and
no, you can't do anything.
so you've got your diamond point. These come in a very sharp point, or like this one that's slightly rounded. It's got about a 2 mm radius on the tip. You get your plain square one, and you get your round one like that. So that's the set that people normally get. Now, to add to that set, you can get the swan neck tool, which is good for hollowing. So you can do a little hollow form, that'll get in there and do it. This works well for hollowing. It's got quite a small cutter, so it's not trying to take too big a cut. You can get the same bar with the small round cutter on it, which is good for hollowing, where you don't want to take a deep cut. Now this is the square one that I prefer to use. It's got a very, very slight radius. So if you haven't seen the radius one, I'll pass that over. You can compare the two, the square one and the radius. It's a very, very slight difference, but it makes a big difference when you actually do the cut. So another option is to get a round cutter with a round bar. And there's some advantages to having a round bar if you want to shear scrape, like you want to put the cutter on an angle, which can work if you're going deep inside a vessel and you want to just clean up the end grain across the bottom of the box or a hollow form or something like that. By putting it as a shear scraper, it'll take just a less aggressive cut than if it's going straight in. So that can be useful for that, but it's not something I use a lot of. I'm not a huge fan of these. I got them all just to try out because so many of our beginners were using them. So let's talk about the rules of turning. Now we know if we're turning a bowl side grain, the grain's going across this way, so it's easy to cut straight into the grain this way, and that's the preferred direction of cut, to cut straight into that cross grain. Or if we want to cut across the edge, the ideal presentation is to slice with the tip of a gouge across that end grain in that direction there. I'll just show that. Let's see what's been here. So typically what we would do if we were facing up a bowl blank, we would probably, it's going to be a lot rougher looking than this one, we would typically do a scrape across the paste grain like this to square it up. That's quite an easy cut to do, and if we were going to cut into the side grain, we would point the bevel in the direction we want to go, swing the handle around to take a hollowing cut in that direction. That's fine. We're cutting into the grain, we've got supported grain where we're cutting, and you're not going to have too many problems doing that. Then if we want to cut across the side where you've got end grain coming around twice in every revolution, you're hitting that end grain. And as the end grain comes over, you might just be able to see it here, so you've got a supported grain where it cuts in that direction, but unsupported grain at that part of the end grain. So that's where you tend to get the tear out, it lifts the grain and you don't get as clean a cut. So the ideal situation is to slice across the end grain in this direction here. And it's a very controllable cut because we're slicing with the nose, the wing is removing the waste, and we're rubbing the bevel so we've got support. So here we go, in here. And once you've got a little bit of support, it's very easy just to go across there. Oh. A little bit tougher than I thought. There we go. This is a piece of peppermint. So you can see that you've got plenty of support. The tool rest is underneath the part of the tool that's doing the cut, which is one of the primary rules of wood turning. You've got support for the cutting edge directly beneath the cut like that. So that gives you plenty of support as you go across. You're rubbing the bevel, you've got good control. And you're slicing across the end grain so you get a reasonably clean cut. In fact, that's quite burnished from the rubbing of the bevel. Now, that's the basic principles of turning with the gouge. when we start to use scrapers across end grain, across the side grain where it hits the end grain, that's where we have problems. So here across the face grain, that's fine. The rules with scrapers is that the cut has to happen at less than 90 degrees. If it's more than 90 degrees, your tool's going to try and dig in. And what will happen, if it digs in there, it's going to pull the tool down and you get a nasty catch like that. So to come across this face grain, a couple of things that you need to keep in mind with scrapers is that you want to limit the amount of edge that's engaged in the wood. So this is a 3/4 inch wide scraper. If I could probably get away with cutting 3/4 of an inch at a time, but I'm asking for trouble if I try to dig, too wide a cut. So the general rule with scrapers, even a square end scraper like this, is I try to have just a little bit of relief, so it's not perfectly straight across, and that way you never have the whole 3/4 of an inch digging in all at once, because it's much harder to control. So we're going to present the tool with the handle raised a little bit, and we're going to bring it across there just gently. This is just a clean-up cut, so we're not trying to remove a lot of wood. We can just come across there and we're not going to have any problem at all. So handles raised, and we can come across there, do a clean-up cut. If we want to go a little bit harder, we can. And again, if we were another area where you might use a scraper like this, if you're doing if you're setting out a piece to actual dimensions, so say it's got a half cove and into a half bead into a fillet, and then a half cove and then a fillet, you would block it out with a scraper like this. So this is an accurate way of getting to an exact size. You can push in quite firmly. I'm not cutting with the whole blade, so I've got control. And that's fine. That's great. Now where you have problems is when you come around here and you want to, say you've got a rough patch from using your bowl gouge, and you want to clean it up a little bit. The danger we have in using a scraper like this and coming in from this direction is that, again, twice in every revolution we're going to hit the unsupported end grain. And what tends to happen is the tool tries to dig in a little bit and you don't have the control. I don't know, most of you have probably at some time needed to use a parting tool. You needed to cut in this direction here into the cross grain side grain mix of a bowl type orientation, and you'll know that it's not too bad when you're close to the tool rest, but as soon as you start getting a little bit further in with the parting tool down here, you start catching that end grain and you lose control. You can get away with it with a thin parting tool, but as soon as that cut gets a little bit wider, you lose control. And this is where the problem comes in with using carbides. Because if I was to use a square carbide, if I was to use a square carbide, I'm fine coming in here, but this edge of the carbide, if I'm pushing down here, this edge of the carbide is hitting that end grain when it comes around. So it would be better if it didn't have an edge on there. So you could probably remove that edge if you wanted to. But that's what we see happening. People are cutting in Can you see that on the camera, right? You're cutting it in this direction, which is the ideal direction to be cutting, but the side of the tool is hitting the end grain as it comes around there. The unsupported part of the end grain there is catching on that and digging in, and you're losing a bit of control. So how do you get away with that if you need to clean up a cut coming across there? Well, that's when we start using negative rake or shear scraping. So most of you know the definitions of those, but that's what I put in that handout. So a negative rake scraper typically has two bevels. It has a bevel on the top and a bevel on the bottom. There's no set rules about the angle.
Tip it forward.
That way?
Yeah, just to see the edge.
Yep. So there's no real rules about how steep either of those bevels are. I prefer an angle similar to what you would use on a normal scraper, and then just adding a small, like a 15-degree negative rake on the top, and it makes all the difference to the cut. So there's your normal scraper, single bevel, quite a steep bevel. So I would say that's probably, 75 to 80 degrees maybe even, and that works fine as a scraper. So if we're going to go negative rake, we keep about the same angle, but so we've got 15 degrees taken off the top, so we've got to take 15 degrees more off the bottom. So the big advantage of negative rake scrapers is that cut is less aggressive. Despite all the other good reasons for using it, the main reason is that it's less aggressive. So if we're cutting into a piece and we've got a little bit of overhang, you've got much more control. When we're cutting into end grain, it's less aggressive, so it's not going to be grabby when it hits the end grain. And that's why we could use a negative rake to clean up this side grain. So we want to make sure, if we're scraping the outside of this, we want to make sure that where we're cutting, where the tool is actually cutting the wood, is presented at less than 90. So if we cut right on the centre line, that axis there, the wood's coming down and it's hitting it about 90 degrees. We start lifting the tool rest up a bit higher and presenting it into the wood in that direction. Now we've got greater than 90 degrees and we're much more likely for the tool to dig in and get a catch. So it's not an ideal situation by any means to be scraping into the side of a bowling. But if we have to, we lower the tool rest just a little bit to make sure we're cutting at or slightly below centre on the outside. Rather than using a normal scraper, we'll use a negative rake scraper, and you can get away with it. Again, we're trying to reduce the aggressiveness of the cut. So by having the negative rake, it's a less aggressive cut, and we also reduce the amount of the edge that we use. So we only use a small part of the edge. And you can get away with that. That's, if you're trying to take bumps out, you're not necessarily going to improve the surface. You can see already that the surface is a little bit rougher, but it shouldn't go too deeply, that slight roughness that's occurred there. You would normally only want to use a scraper if you had some bumps and you're just trying to revise that shape to get the shape just how you want it. So that's using a negative rake in the end grain. The other way to improve that surface is to use a shear scraper. So a shear scraper is a normal scraper that's presented to the work on an angle like this. So fairly steep angle, supported on the tool rest, and we drag the tool across the end grain in that direction. Your shear scraper can be any of your scrapers or any of your bowl gouges for that matter, but just presented on that angle to give you a shear cut. Now, to be successful as a shear scraper, you really need to be cutting with the burr. So you need to have a fresh burr off the grinder on there, and that will catch and just give you a very clean cut. So I'll demonstrate that first. I can be a little bit higher with a shear cut, shear scrape, not a shear cut. Will the camera show that? Okay, so I'm on the edge, and I'm going to keep the cut the same as you do with the skew. Keep the cut in the bottom third of the tool. Any higher up and you tend to lose control, because the support for the cut has to be below where the cut's taking place. So if I'm supported here and I'm cutting up there, it's tending to pull that tool down really severely. So if I cut down on the bottom third, I've got most of the support below where the cut is. So here we go. Cross. This peppermint is really quite hard. I have got a little burr on there. There we go. And you can see, well, that's mostly dust, but quite fine shavings. If you've got a good burr, you get fine shavings off that, and that will improve the edge. So again, what you're doing is you're doing a less aggressive cut than using a standard scraper straight in. So that'll give you a reasonably clean cut. And the same across face grain. If you want to clean up your face grain with a shear scraper. Still getting mostly dust, but on softer woods in particular, you'll get just a very fine shaving. And it's the same, whatever your tool is, it's the way that you present it that makes it a scrape or a shear scrape. So, for instance, I don't know if you remember, how many remember Maury Munro? He was a great turner down in Mandurah for many years, and a great bloke. When he got rid of some of his tools, I got this one off him. Actually, the club was going to use it, and most of the members said, oh, that's dangerous, we can't let any of the members use that. So what I did is I ground a slight curve to the blade, and because it's at 45 degrees, it becomes a really nice shear scraper, and quite controllable too if you keep those things in mind. You cut on the bottom third of the tool, you're cutting using the burr, so you're just pulling it towards yourself. And that'll clean up that surface quite nicely. So that's a shear scrape as well. If you can, I don't know if you can see that, but that's a beautiful clean surface on there. So that's shear scraping on there. Of course, the other way you would do it would be with your bowl gouge. So the bowl gouge you would shear scrape the same way, but remember, if we scrape like this with your bowl gouge, like you might do when you're cleaning up the face before turning a bowl. That's just a standard scrape. When you pull, that's not a pull cut, that's just a scrape, a pure scrape, because you're scraping just on that bottom edge, there's no bevel support, the edges at 90 degrees to the wood. That's just a plain scrape. So if you see these people say, oh, I never use a scraper, I just use my bowl gouges, you know, but a lot of the time, all of us at some time are scraping with our bowl gouge. So that would be a regular scrape, which would do mostly what we want to do. If we want to improve that surface, we need to drop the handle so that that edge is shear scraping. So to drop the handle, we've got to bring that down nice and low. We can do a shear scrape by dropping the handle and just pulling that edge across. And you'll see by those shavings that you're getting a very, very fine cut. To get into the centre, I've got to have that tool rest really low. But if your handle isn't down, you're not shear scraping, you're just scraping. So that's a shear scrape with the bowl gouge, and the same if you're going across the end grain and you want to clean that up. We can shear scrape with our bowl gouge across there. You see little shavings that are coming off there? They're just tiny little shavings. It is a scrape cut, but it will leave an improved finish over using any tool straight on. That has got to be about as clean a finish as you can get. But again, handle down and just dragging it across there. The reason that cut like that compared to the scraper is simply that the cutting edge is much finer. So where it's doing that scrape is, what would that be, 30 or 40 degrees compared to the scrapers that are around 70 or 80 degrees. So that'll give you a clean, as clean a finish as you would get off any tool. So that's shear scraping. Now the problem we have with using our carbides is that it's much more difficult to control. So we can do a shear scrape. Will those squares come back? Yeah. You can do a shear scrape with the square carbide. But the problem we're going to have is that there's no burr. You can't put a burr on a carbide, so we're relying on the sharpness of that edge just to give us a cut across there. So again, on its side, we're cutting on the bottom third to bottom half of that square. Taking a fairly heavy cut, but what you find is that it's a little bit harder to control because you're balancing on the corner of the tool, or you could have a round tool, and you have to have the tool presented a little bit more at about 90 degrees to the work. You've got no burr to pick that cut up, so you're at 90 degrees to the work and you're just pulling it across there like that. And you can see that when I did that cut, that it actually introduced some bumps because I can't pull it across there evenly. So what I've got to do is just do a very, very light pull across there. So you can get away with it. It's not an ideal tool for shear scraping. Same with the round one. I'll show you the round one as well. I can have that presented at 45 degrees to pick up a cut. Okay, so I got away with that, but again, I'm balancing it, trying to hold the cut just in the right spot. You don't have quite as much control with that as you do with a tool with a burr on it. So come back, we'll do one more with this to clean it up. Okay, so that's basically covered the types of cuts using scrapers and using carbides. What I'll do is I'll demonstrate first on a bowl, using the same cuts on a bowl where you might use them. And show you why carbides aren't ideal on bowls. Oh, yeah, that's right, I'm going to use that one. I've gone a little bit out of round. Ooh, has gone a little bit out of round. So this was roughed out when it was wet about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and so it has moved, and as you would expect. What I'll do is I'll just clean up that tenon to make sure that I get a good grip on it when I turn it around, and I can do that using whichever preferred tool. Fairly good. I like to take this corner off when I do a tenon. Sometimes it catches on the inside of the jaws, so I have a little bit of clearance there. It gives me a better fit into the chuck jaws. Okay, so now if I wanted to scrape the outside of this, what are my best options? Well, you're not going to have too much trouble if you can cut in this direction, but you don't want to be catching the end grain when it comes around. So if you were to use, say, a standard scraper, you'd probably be alright as long as you didn't have too wide a cut. So a very, very gentle cut, and also at less than 90 degrees, so we've got to drop the handle a bit to make sure that we're the handle's raised. You can, but it's not an ideal cut, because although most of it is sort of like at 45 degrees and you're cutting into supported grain, which is ideal, you are coming across that end grain as it comes around. So it's very hard to get a good finish. You're going to have tear out wherever the end grain is, and without the bevel support it's harder to steer as well. So if we wanted to do that with a round carbide, we would be in exactly the same position. In fact, even worse, because the carbide, you end up cutting on this inside edge. And so that inside edge is hitting that end grain when it comes around, and you haven't got a lot of support for the tool. You're relying on yourself to steer it around there. You've got no bevel supporting it, and a lot of the cutting is done on that edge, and that's going to be going straight into the end grain when it comes around. It's a lot harder to steer too, so you can hear now when I'm coming around here that I'm getting, it's trying to dig in. you haven't got good control, you know, which is dangerous for beginners, and you're going to get a rougher cut too. So they're not ideal for doing the outside of a bowl like that. If you've shaped it to where you're happy with and you just want to clean that cut up again, you can come along with a negative rate scraper. Any of them, doesn't really matter which one. Preferably not cutting too much, not one that's cutting with too much of the edge touching at once, but a negative rate scraper will clean that cut up quite well. That's taken some of the bumps out. Probably hasn't improved the surface tremendously. You can see the tear out there is really quite severe. And that's from the regular scraper. Let's try one more scrape with the negative rate scraper and see if it improves that. To be sure that I'm over 90, less than 90 degrees, I'm still holding the handle up a little bit. So you can see how deep the damage is from using a regular scraper when it hits that end grain. That tear out is quite deep. I've removed half of it by using the negative rake. Some woods are going to be better than others, of course. Really dense woods scrape quite well. But anything that's a little bit softer, you get a huge amount of tear out where that end grain comes across and it's unsupported, it's lifting it. That there. So how am I going to get a better finish? Using the scraper, I'm going to shear scrape that. So let me try with, you won't all have a weird looking shear scraper like this one. I'll show you how it works. It works fine. Cutting on the bottom half of the tool, because there's a burr, taking just a fairly fine cut. So even where it's going directly into the, I need to move that a little bit. I need to have quite a big overhang for this to get the tool through there. So even here where it's coming directly into the end grain as it comes around, because I've got a burr on it and it's just slicing across it. Didn't take much of a cut across that end grain, did it? That will have improved the surface. I'll do the same with this one as a shear scraper. I've shaped this one copying Richard Raffin's one. And Tomatech calls it a refiner. This was a P&M skew, and that's why it's still got a second bevel on the top. Eventually it'll come back and it won't have a second bevel. I don't need that to be a negative rate. I just need it to be a regular scraper and a shear scraper. Tiny little shavings coming off there. There's not much of a burr on it.
Do you find that Raffin one easier to use? Do you find it easier to use?
This one?
Yeah, it doesn't look as if it would make an awful lot of difference from the other tools that you're using.
It's good because it's got the rounded thing there, so that makes it good. It's got a decent thickness.
Yep.
Whereas some of the other tools that even, come as scrapers, that came as a scraper and it's quite a bit thinner. Thickness is always better for scrapers. There's a Henry Taylor one that's quite beefy. That one came as a regular scraper from China, but it's reasonable thickness. I thought that was quite a good value tool, that one. I think I paid about $45 for it, and it's a massive big scraper. Some of the Timu stuff I've been pretty happy with. Other stuff not so much. I bought one of their SKUs, that one there, and thickness and cutting bevel, everything on that was good on it, but the steel, it's, you know, it says high speed steel, but when you sharpen it, it's got sort of real sparkles like carbon steel has. So, and it doesn't hold an edge very well, but I'll use it for something. So we're getting there. Now what you find, if you're going to use scrapers, you've got to be close to your sharpening system. You've got to sharpen it a lot. So you can touch up the edge using a diamond card. I use the coarse side, about 150 grit, and just yeah, you can do it the proper way, and that'll give you a bit of a burr to keep you going for a while. Or excuse me, the other thing you can do is you can raise a burr using a burnisher. Now this is just a little tungsten tip tool that's used for sharpening garden tools like your spades or your secateurs or whatever like that. You just drag it across, and it's hard steel, so it will raise a burr. I can drag that across there, and that'll raise quite a big burr. Now, if you're used to it, that first couple of cuts using it with a big burr like that will be really grabby. But that's quicker than going to a grinder. You can have that there and just touch it up each time. So now I've come across here, I've got a decent burr on it. I'll see if I can take a better shear scrape. So we're starting to get there now, but the tear out you can see is from that original cut, the first cut with the standard scraper. So it takes a lot to clean it up. I mean, you could go to sandpaper, but you're going to be sanding for a while at 80 grit before you get rid of that. Get the finish. So see how fine those shavings are, because you've got a burr. The burr is cutting that really, really fine. So that's what you do on the outside of the bowl if you wanted to scrape it to improve the finish. But where you will have difficulty is scraping the inside of a bowl. So what happens when you want to scrape the inside of a bowl? When a lot of the cut is going to be into the side of your bowl. It's okay across the bottom of your bowl, but across this section here, a regular scraper works fairly well. Negative rake even better. But as you come down here, down the side wall of the bowl, you're hitting that end grain all the time. You haven't got wood in front of you, so you're cutting the side of it here, and you're going to have trouble. So for people that are trying to do that with a carbide, they're going to have trouble every time. So if you're teaching a new turner and they want to use their carbides, what do you do so that they don't get into danger? Well, preferably you teach them how to use a bowl gouge, because it's the best way to do it. And I mean, if we're teaching people, we want to teach them the best, you know, use the tools, the right tool for the job, and in a way that's safe for them and for everyone around. So on the inside of the bowl we need to be above halfway so that that angle there is now less than 90 degrees. If I come in with the standard scraper and I hit there, most of the cut is going to be on this side of the tool, and we're hitting that end grain twice in every revolution. I'll try a small cut. I'm not a real fan of doing it. Can't see anything in there, can you? But you'll find that what happens, yes, I'm getting away with it. I'm only cutting with a small part of the edge. Don't go using a gouge, I mean a scraper that's this shape and cutting with, you know, half an inch or an inch of the edge. You're going to get into trouble every time, hitting that end grain. So yes, you can get away with it, but ideally it's not the best tool to use, and you know, even though I can get away with that cut, if I stop and have a look at the surface, I'm going to have two big areas of tear out. Now I don't know, the camera probably can't see there. So you've got a big area of tear out here, and a big area of tear out there, where you're hitting the unsupported end grain as it's lifting it up. So how do we get away from that if we're not using a bowl gouge? Well, a negative rate scraper will clean that up a little bit. You can still get into trouble with a negative rate scraper when you're coming on the side wall. So negative rate scraper, above centre, just a very, very gentle cut. Because it's less aggressive, you're not going to get into too much trouble with it. Keep the cut area on the tool fairly small, and just a light cut, not pushing hard. Hear how it changed when I came up the side? Down the bottom we're good. We're hitting more of that end grain. We're going directly into the unsupported end grain as we come around there, and it's bouncing and it's not happy at all. So if you have to clean it up, like you've got a bowl, you've hollowed it with a gouge and you've got bumps and stuff that you just want to smooth it a little bit before you go to sandpaper. This will save you quite a bit of sandpaper by doing a very, very light scrape. It's not going to go deep into the wood, so it's not going to do more damage than a normal, the scraper would do, a plain scraper. And then the better way would be to shear scrape it. Now, a little bit tricky. Again, keep the cut area fairly small, make sure you've got a burr, and just you're dragging it so that the burr is the part that's cutting. Not easy to steer around the corner. If anything, I'll probably made that worse than it was before. it's a little bit wide to get in there that way. So say I went for a round carbide, same thing, tools on its side. I haven't got a burr now though. So it's not as effective without the burr on it. So you've got a beginner that wants to hollow their bowl out using a carbide. What's the best way to do it? Well, you don't want to discourage them from turning altogether, but you do want them to be safe. So ideally, if you're going to cut in there with a carbide, use a smaller one. There's less edge involved in the wood. You've got a little bit more chance of not having an accident, which is always good. And you want to mainly be cutting into the side grain, not into the end grain. So the tool's flat on there. Hear how it grabs? It's not too bad once you get down the bottom, it's this bit at the side. So you want to make sure that you're just cutting just with a small part of the edge. But the problem you've got is you've got no bevel support, so it's hard to steer. You're relying on your own arms just to hold that steady and spin it around there. And you've got the pressure on the edge that's making it bounce like this. So it's difficult to control. You can, I've seen a lot of our beginners using the point tool. I like the one that's got a slight round to it. Why this is an advantage is you're only cutting with a very small part of the tip. You're cutting with the point. Don't start letting that whole side touch the wood. You've got an area there that's looks like more than half an inch. If that hits into the end grain, you get a nasty shock. So you can just cut with the tip. But it's hard to control. You can't get a nice smooth curve. It's very, very difficult. So maybe for removing wood, it's just not ideal. So I don't encourage people to do that. And of course, you know, that's rough as guts to finish in there. You've got all the bumps because it's not a smooth cut, and you've got tons of tear out. So it's far better if you've got your carbides and you want to use them for something like boxes or hollow forms. They're quite good for that because they tend to be sharp. As long as, you know, you don't get like a Scrooge and not turn them around. But if your edge gets a little bit dull, and the other thing is that they chip on hard timbers. So this is where using a scraper or using a carbide makes a bit more sense to me. I've got rough wood, an old pergola that was cut down, it's still got paint on it. The timber is jarrah and it's hard as, full of silica. Bowl gougers don't like it at all. It just blunts the tools really quickly. So here's a good reason perhaps to use carbide. To clean up this, we're just going to go across. It's a scraping cut. We're going straight into side grain, so we're fine. We can take a reasonable cut width-wise. I still like this slightly radiused one because it gives you a little bit of feel. With the square one, when you come in, it's all or nothing. You know, you've got the whole edge cutting or you've got none. But because of this slight radius, you've got a little bit more feel with how it cuts. And this will get rid of this paint very easily. A little bit high there. So I know with this timber, with the paint and everything in it, if I'd used a normal scraper, it would be blunt now just with that. So carbide, it will hold its edge enough to get rid of all that. This has got, you know, quite a bit of surface damage. The timber was pretty rough when it was put up, I'd say. So that can come off a little bit more than that. Or we can come down to the centre. So that's great, you know, that's removed, you know, most of what I wanted to. Tools still sharp. I haven't wrecked my good tools by doing that. So if I'm going to make a box out of this, which is what I demonstrated down in Bunbury, I can remove the wood to make my recess very quickly. So if I use the square one, the problem is that the 2 points, one of the points will dig in because you've got to have it perfectly square. If it's off slightly, you get a line from the point. So this, by being just slightly radius, means that I can avoid the corner digging in, or I can dig in just one corner instead of both of them at once. See if I've I've got a lot of wood to work with on the outside there. Pass these ones around. There's a finished one. And maybe pass that in the other direction. There's one that hasn't been sanded. That's the off the tool finish using scrapers only. So you'll see that some parts of it using scrapers, the finish is acceptable to go onto sandpaper. But anywhere where you're coming across the end grain with a scraper, it's going to be pretty rough. Now, these boxes that I'm turning are designed to be used. They're not a showpiece. I'm making some up for my grandkids so that they'll all have something from me and they can put their bits and bobs in it. And it's something that can just be bashed around. It's not going to matter too much. I'm not looking for perfect, I'm just looking for nice and hopefully usable. That's better. More better. So I don't know what that'll show. But that finish across there, mostly on a pretty rough bit of jarrah, is sandable now. That's quite a reasonably acceptable finish once it's sanded. Any questions so far? Am I boring you all to death? No? No? Is it all making sense? My consideration with the design of this bowl was that the box was that I wanted to be able to return it. I wanted to leave the recess and spigots or whatever I used on there so that I could put it back on and clean it up in years to come, even if it's just to sand it back and put a bit more finish on. So just a practical design. So now we're going to go down the side. While we're going in this direction, not so good when it's hitting against the side grain. Now, carbide will do that all right, as long as you're not putting pressure that way into the wood. So the edge has a slight slope to it, which is advantageous with carbides. It means that that edge is coming away from the wood a little bit as you go in. Okay, we've got a slight right there. Now my tool rest isn't in the ideal position, but that's just a scrape to round that over. You could come in there with a gouge and round over this half beam, okay? For this project, just rounding it over like that is enough. Can't quite see what I'm doing. Again, that's going to be not the best of finishes. I can come down there by shear scrape it or whatever to improve that finish a little bit. Pretty hard in this jarrah. You can see now why it's got that notch out of it. I can get into that corner with the sharp bottom corner. Okay. I can't really see that well. So for this wood, this particular project, the scraper works fine for that so far. Same with the inside. Sure, you could hollow it out with a bowl gouge. Your problem then being that you've got a sharp corner deep in there. You can't get into that corner with the bowl gouge no matter how you do it. You can come down straight down the side, but you can't get around there. So why not just do it all with a scraper? If you're doing it with a scraper, you're better to have a hole in the middle, a depth hole. So why do I need a depth hole? Because otherwise I would have to use the whole width of that cutter at once to go in there. Now these aren't that wide, so it's not too big of a problem. But if your scraper's wider than this and you're using a square scraper, say this one, that's too wide a cut to do in one go. So having a hole in the middle means that you're reducing the amount of the edge that's cutting. So you just using half that edge at a time to get that started. And then in this, really nasty just pushing it straight in, and it very quickly clears that out without what I want. Get over the bit here where I need to clear it. So your carbide very quickly removes that waste. And here you've got a good advantage of the carbide in that I can go down to the bottom, I can pull it across, and I'm cutting just with this left hand side as it comes across. But only a small part of the tool. It's only less than a millimetre probably, just to come across there. And that's the cut that doesn't give you a good finish, but I'm just removing waste, so it doesn't matter there. So where the finish matters is straight in the bottom, and that's cutting into side grain. That's good, that's fine. Come across there. So here's where you have problem with the scraper. You want to cut down the side of this, and you'll see from the one that we passed around that the finish there is really pretty poor coming off. Could have gone a bit deeper there. The finish into this side here is very poor. I've got a big chip out the top of my rib. Doesn't matter, I'm just showing it for now. So because I want this to slope out a little bit, it's not ideal to get in there with the carbide. What can you do to clean up that cut? Well, first of all, Jarrah dust. Gotta love it, don't you? Go home and you have brown stuff coming out of all your orifices. So here's a box scraper. It's got a less than 90-degree corner, negative rake on the front and on the side. Side not so important when you're doing end grain boxes. Doing end grain boxes, it's nice to have a negative rake on the front because that's sitting into end grain, which can be hard to control, especially if you're down the bottom of a deep box and you've got a lot of overhang. So having a negative rake makes that cut less aggressive, easier to control for across the bottom of end grain. But this is side grain, so I need that negative rake on the side to try and clean up that side a little bit. I don't want too much of that edge cutting across the bottom there. So you can see that with the negative rake, it's a less aggressive cut. I can get away with a tool that's a lot thinner you know, if I was using a normal scraper, I would want something that's got a bit of thickness to it. This is a Robert Sorby skew, which is a pretty poor excuse for a skew, if you ask me. It came in a set. So I just reground it just for this sort of work, cleaning up the inside of corner of a bigger box. It's probably a little bit low. I need to be cutting at less than 90 degrees, so I need to be above centre on the inside. And you can see the sort of shavings that are coming off. Are quite fine. I still need to flatten up across that bottom a little bit, so I'll go back to my little slightly radius carbide. Just clean up that. I've got a chip out of there which doesn't look very good. So that's going to be rougher than the one I passed around probably, or very thick in the bottom too. But it's just to give you an idea of how I would use scrapers, particularly carbides, on a side grain box. I'll pass that one around if you want to have a look at it. I didn't take enough out of the bottom, but so yeah, it's sandable. I'm not real happy with the inside down the side. You can't get that clean using scrapers. Ideally, you would come in with a spindle gouge or a bowl gouge with a long nose. That one's got a reasonably long nose. By long nose I mean that the wings are ground back and it's ground at about a 40-degree angle. So you can get the bevel rubbing and you can go down there. Not quite so easy with a bowl gouge as it is with a spindle gouge. You can take a nice clean cut going sideways down the inside of a cross grain box. The reason that works is because the nose, the tip of the tool, is slicing across that end grain and giving a slicing cut, and that'll give you the best finish you can get. So better to do that than if you're looking for a really good finish. Otherwise you'll be sanding forever and it'll still never look right. Even the one that I polished that's in there, that you passed around, it's very obvious where the tear out is on that. So yeah, that's the bottom of the box. This is the inside of the box, which is very basic. Using a scraper, not a problem. You would probably use a bowl gouge though, because it's just side grain. It's exactly the same as a shallow bowl, isn't it? So you would use a bowl gouge for that. If you wanted to use a scraper, I'll do that with the scraper. Now this one I know is too wide, so I'm just going to take that. I'm slicing across the side of the end grain this way. But if I want to do it all with a scraper, a round nose scraper will get in there fine. I've got to bring that back a little bit more to get in there, I think. There's nothing hard about following this with a round nose. Your finish isn't going to be as good as if you use a bowl gouge. You're probably just going to use a bowl gouge. Again, if you wanted to clean that cut up a bit, go to negative rake. Less aggressive, taking a smaller shaving, and that leaves a better finish. Probably no need to go to shear scrape on something like this. If you did, it can be done. It's a little bit harder because you've got a curved surface. But it can be done. So probably you would use a bowl gouge, and then if your shape wasn't quite right or you had some bumps or something, then you go to a scraper, preferably a negative rake. So can you see the advantages of the negative rake compared to a normal scraper? To scrape in there with my normal scraper, I've got to have the tool rest at a height so that I can lift the handle to get less than 90 degrees where it's hitting the wood there. Less than 90 degrees, so that's what I have to have it. Now if I do that with a negative rake, I don't have to lift the handle, I can just hold it flat like that. In some ways that means you can have your arm over the top, you've got much more control than if you're up here like this. So you've got a bit better control. It's a finer cut, it's not going to remove as much wood, but it's going to leave a better finish. So there. And one of the other advantages of using a negative rake, if I was to hollow that with a bowl gouge, right, I want it so that the bowl gouge is finishing right on centre, just slightly high there. So my cut's going to come around here, handle down, so start with it square, make your entry cut, slightly rotate it backwards slightly so that it's cutting with the bottom wing comes into play, drop the handle down, swing it around and then up and finish at the centre line there. Okay, now if I say, well, now I've got to go to a scraper to clean that mess up, what tends to happen is, I've got to raise the tool rest, or I've got to drop the tool rest, whichever. I'm alright in this case. But more often than not, to go from your bowl gouge to a scraper means adjusting the tool rest. Now to go from bowl gouge to a negative rake scraper, you don't have to adjust the tool rest. You've got a little bit more leeway up and down there. Now you might think, oh, that's not a big deal, but if you're doing production work where you're constantly going from that tool to that tool, the extra step of adjusting the tool rest adds time that you don't want if you're doing production. Okay, I'm not going to finish the shape. It makes no sense. You all know what you're doing from there. You could round that with ideally I would round that with a gouge. So you get a reasonable finish if you round it with a scraper. Especially a negative rake scraper is a less aggressive, it's going to cut around there. And then you can hit that with a bit of sandpaper. Same in the other direction. very pretty, but so because those shavings are so small, you're going to get a reasonable finish off the tool. So ready for sanding then, you know. Whereas if I used a gouge, I probably wouldn't get the shape quite right, and then I'd want to touch it up with a scraper anyway. So I haven't gone deep enough there. Let's see, I'll just go a little bit deeper. I want to clean up that corner because my that's my chucking recess, so I can just shear scrape into that corner to give me a little bit cleaner corner. And assuming that was how I wanted it to be, I'd be ready to turn it around. And I would hold that in these jaws the same way, and that's enough of a recess to hold that to finish shaping the lid. And again, that's very straightforward shaping. You wouldn't necessarily shape it with a scraper. You'll do most of it with a bowl gouge, or a bowl gouge and a spindle gouge, but finish it off with a scraper if you wanted to. So I hope that through all my ramblings you can see that there is an advantage to using scrapers in some situations, that carbides are dangerous to use on bowls. They have their place. They're really good for hollowing end grain boxes or hollow forms. They're good for that. But for cross grain work, bowls and things, they can be dangerous if they catch that end grain. So that's about all I really wanted to cover. So I have any questions at all? No? You're all for bottles now?
Just a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Right, if you're using your bowl gouge now, let's say on this,
Yep.
how would you hold it?
How would I hold the bowl gouge? It's, if you've got a bowl gouge with a long handle, it's pretty tricky to get around there. So I'll just show you. I've got two bowl gouges these are the two that I normally use. The bigger one has a fairly flat wing. See how that wing's fairly straight?
Yep.
And the smaller one has got a sharper point, but the wing's a little bit more curved. So I find that for, I'll just show this, George, if you don't mind. Oh, not George, Jeff. I just saw you out the corner of my eye. So the one with the straighter wings is great for rough cuts. Which is, it's basically just a scrape. You're scraping with that bottom wing.
Yeah.
Now if I wanted to cut with the bottom wing, I'd have to drop the handle, and then I'd come around here. Now I'm cutting with the bottom wing and I need bevel support. So I come around here, and then now I'm on the bevel. You see the difference in the shapings that you're getting off there, because you're dropping the handle, you've got bevel support, rubbing the bevel, coming around there, and you'll see in the wood that that's very clean there, where it cut with the bevel rubbing. That's going across the end grain, so it's not a fair comparison really.
Yeah.
So that's using that one, and I use this one mainly for roughing out big bowls where I want to remove a lot of waste. Just with that pull cut like that, it'll take a big wide pull cut, and this whole of that straight wing is cutting. Now, this one's fairly straight at the moment, but normally it's a bit more curved like the top there, and I use that more for this type of cut because that roundness of that wing, if it was going in the other direction, that'll pick up the cut nicely coming around there, a little bit easier than the straight wing. So if I'm coming down here, all of that cut is on the wing. Can't quite get around there. I can pick it up here. Right, so that's doing it as a pull cut. What I'm more likely to do with this is to do it with a push cut here. So here I'm rubbing the bevel, cutting quite a heavy cut with the bottom ring. So I'm doing a bit of an OG shape there, so I'm moving the handle to get that shape. So there I am. I could start with the tool, at the 90 degrees or the closed flute position they call it these days. Come in there, swing the handle around, and it's not until I get around there that bevel is rubbing. But once the bevel's rubbing there, now I can open the flute a little bit. I roll the flute backwards a little bit. Now it's starting to cut. So there it's just pushing straight into it, and it's not a good cut. So here, roll it, open that flute up a little bit. Steer it round. But it's just that little bit of finessing with how much you roll the flute open and how much you drop the handle, and that comes naturally when you look at what the edge is doing as it hits the wood.
Comes naturally?
Well, you get to know where you want the cut to be on the tip. So you start the cut right on the very tip, and then by rolling it, the cut comes a little bit further down the wing, takes a deeper cut. So it's a bit hard because I'm coming around from such a weird angle. So from here, try to get that bevel rubbing, drop the handle if you can. You can see now that the tip is cutting, and that's giving a clean finish, and all the wing is just getting rid of all the waste out of the way. So there we are. And the ideal cutting presentation is always at about 45 degrees. So now I've gone from the tip being at 90 degrees, I've rolled it around to about 45 degrees. I'm taking a slicing cut with the tip. Yeah, right through the bottom here on that. And because that bevel was rubbing, it's going to be a reasonably clean surface. You can see where the bevel started rubbing to there.
I'm going to be brilliant next week.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, guys. Pleasure to come down here. Enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Jeff.
you very much.